that we've got on this evening. Apologies to the people watching on Zoom. We're starting late because everybody got in from sailing very late. I myself didn't come out of changing rooms till 6:30. So everything's been running a bit late this evening. But my job here is to introduce our guest speaker, Chris Draper. Chris started his career in Oppies, moved very quickly into fast boats like 49ers, where he became world champion and got a bronze medal. And then decided he wanted to go faster still, moved into extreme 40s and was recruited, headhunted from there by the Italian team to helm their 72-foot America's Cup boat, where he was runner-up from I've forgotten the name of the qualifiers, but the Louis Vuitton Cup. They then went on, any of you with good memories will know that they then went on to try and race in AC62 catamarans, and Chris was very heavily involved in the design, from the sailing team's point of view, heavily involved in the design and spec and everything of an AC62. When the Americans saw how seriously the Italians were taking it, they decided to change the rules because the Italians were probably going to beat them. And so they moved to the AC50s, which we know about today. And Chris is very active in the SailGP fleet. He was sailing over the weekend in Denmark. I don't know how many of you have seen the recordings of that. But I'll let Chris tell you I'll let Chris get onto his talk.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here today. My wife and my family, we joined Part Spain at the start of this year. It's been amazing to be a part of this club, and we've been having an absolute blast. And it's literally taken my son from being lukewarm on sailing to absolutely loving it. Thanks for a really kind introduction, Jeff. I've been very fortunate in the sport of sailing. I'll talk a little bit about that. Jeff touched on it. But what I mainly want to talk about today is the foiling. I've basically been involved in hydrofoiling and sailing for the last kind of 10 years, and it's kind of become a specialist subject in terms of the boats that I end up sailing, and also just talk a little bit about how it applies to the sailing that we do every day, sailing displacement boats or racing at the club, anything from your X-boat to your Flying 15 to your laser or whatever, and see if there's some things that we can apply. At the moment, as Jeff alluded to, I'm sailing racing at SailGP. I race with the Japanese team. I just got back last night from the regatta in Aarhus. Hopefully we can play a little video just here. Sorry, a few tech issues. I think we've got any foiling, but never mind. So it's just a quick summary of the race weekend that we just had in Aarhus.
It was an okay day. Probably would have liked to have had some better results, but it was always fun. It's kind of start by saying Look at that. I'm trying to reduce the drag a bit and, give us some good luck. So,
So this is what I really look like. It's a shock to me too.
Plus, minus, max, neutral, twisty things. It's tricky and shifty and we're kicking it well. Let's hope we can keep doing it. Good luck, guys.
Yeah, really stoked to come away with the second place today. We really bounced back from yesterday's, kind of disappointing performance, but it's great to be back and, fighting for the championship.
Nice. So, as you can see, I'm bloody lucky. Get to race what I would regard as some very, very cool race with, some really, really nice people. I'm saying Francesco Bruni, who I sailed with Prada, and most recently become America's Cup legend. Nathan Etheridge, who's been enormously successful in the sport, and then with the Japanese guys, I helped bring a lot of them into the sport, sailing with SoftBank Team Japan. So it's been a lovely sort of story to sail with that group. But Jeff touched on it briefly, but I just want to give you a quick summary of how I got to where I sail GP. I was chatting with some of the guys at the club earlier about pathways through the sport. So I started sailing Optimus and was very lucky to be one of Jim Saltonstall's sort of ferrets, and a massive benefit of his amazing coaching skills. It was, when I sailed Optimus, I was racing with the likes of Ian Percy, Ben Ainsley, and all those guys. We grew up together, racing one another. And then I moved on to 420s, doing the railway youth scheme. And then moved into the 49er, and I was very lucky that was about the same time as lottery funding came online, and we were all able to start competing and racing full time as professional sailors. Effectively, not really making a living, we spent every penny that we had, but it meant that we could train and race full time, and we're still seeing the fruits of that labour now with the likes of Stu and Hannah and the successes that the British team are having. Then I was really, really fortunate to make the transition into professional circuit racing with the Extreme Sailing Series, which was a circuit in sort of 2008, 2009 that was very much at the forefront of the development of the sport. And success in that stemmed on to some good stuff as well, which led me to racing with Team Origin and Ian Percy and Ben and those guys on that team, and the late Andrew Simpson. So that was my first delve into the America's Cup and that world, and the realisation that it really was something that I was very, very interested in. Team Korea then started. It was a bit of a comedy campaign. We were backed by a guy in Korea. He came to us and tried to put a team together, but it ended up being a springboard for an enormous amount of us. And I'm forever thankful to the guy that owned that team. That led me into Prada. AC34, lots of moth sailing, then the SoftBank Team Japan of the America's Cup there in Bermuda, and then more recently sailed GP. I was with the British team as the manager, and then moved over to sail with the Japanese team more recently. I'm sorry guys, I'm really struggling with my tackle here. Okay, sail GP, what is it? It's Nation v Nation. On the video, as you saw, it did have a couple of Japanese people speaking. It is national teams, it is nation to nation. The teams have a certain amount of nationality rules constrained on them. We're racing the F50 catamarans, which are the boats that we raced in Bermuda in the America's Cup. And then they've been taken and adapted and simplified and made a lot more efficient. They've made it so we can travel with them really quickly. We can box them up into a container in a couple of days. Everything comes apart really, really smoothly, and we're not constrained by rules whatsoever. We obviously have a class rule within the class. The boats are capable of, one boat last week, the British boat hit 53 knots, excuse me, which is, it wasn't that long ago that was the water speed sailing record. And we're actually hitting those speeds while racing. We sail with between 5 and 3 sailors on board. We reduce the number of sailors to reduce the amount of weight on the boat and help it to get up and foiling earlier. And then we have, like I said, power-assisted systems. So we command all of the functions on the boat. We fly the boat the whole time. But what we do have is we have an electronic brush motor that is powering hydraulic pumps that are powering accumulators. And then whenever we press a button, hydraulic rams move everything. So think about when you've got your main sheet and you come around a leeward mark, we literally just press a button and it pulls it in. But obviously you have to put it in the right man. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. But it is, if you think of your dream world, these scenarios of if I could do this, that and that now, really, really quickly on your boat, that's kind of the scenario that we're in. So these boats, I cannot get over to you how epic fun they are to sail. They are nuts to sail. They really, really are. And the circle is so about to redefine the sport of sailing. Whether it's doing that or not is sort of up for judgment. But really, what we're trying to do is make a TV broadcast product and focus everything on that. Sometimes that makes it inhibits the racing and doesn't make it quite as legitimate as it could be, but what it does make is for some very good TV, which we've seen over the last few days. Just to give you a quick summary, like I said, tell you a little bit more about the boat. There's literally one rope on board the boat, and that's the wing sheet, the rope that I hold. Everything else is hydraulic rams, so there's rams within rams, different speed rams moving at different moments when you command them. If it needs a big oil consumption, it uses a big ram. If it has really high load, it then obviously uses a different kind of ram, and they're almost within one another. The boat is constantly whirring. It's like just constantly going on and on and on, and the oil is just getting produced, and we're spending it. There's 120 buttons on the boat that function things, so there's 60 on each side. And then within that we have what we call an MD4, which is basically a hub that controls the boat just like your computer, and that gets software updates just like your iPhone. Literally the tech team will come, they'll plug into the MD4 and give it a software update, and something else will move at a different speed. Then within that MD4 we can also control settings of speeds of the way that things move. The other thing that we have with SailGP is that we share the data. So we can actually see live what other people are doing with all their settings on the boats while we're racing. So our coach is constantly watching that. We've got people on the shore watching that all the time. When you're coming off the water from racing, you can see, if you take, for example, your racing today, I could literally go and see how tight you were putting your main sheet on your flying 15 compared to the boat next to you, or I could see where your jib car setting was. I could see absolutely everything. So what that means is we're learning to sail these boats way beyond our expectations of what we ever thought we'd be able to do with them very, very quickly. There's a couple of shots there in the boat of a few things. You saw Nathan in the video a minute ago twiddling the steering wheel. He's got a number of controls on his wheel that actuate different things around the boat. The biggest ones that Nathan has is, you see there, it says diff plus and diff minus, and that changes the righting moment on the boat. So what we're actually doing with these boats, and is what they did with the America's Cup boats more recently, is we're producing enormous righting moment with the foils. So the windward rudder is sucking, and we can control how much that windward rudder is sucking. So when we sail into a lull, rather than having to lift our body weight up to reduce our righting moment, we can literally just turn a dial that reduces the righting moment that's getting pulled through the back of the boat. So we can generate up to 1.5 tons of righting moment through the wind rudder. So we've got like an elephant and a half sitting on the back corner. So if the rudder comes out of the water, you know, the bow goes down the boat. So it's amazing the strains and loads, and I'll keep coming back to strains and loads as we go through this. This picture here is the flight control system. You know, there's a lot of people that think that the boats fly themselves, but they don't. That's why we've got people like Bruni sailing these boats. You know, they are constantly flying the boat, fly-by-wire all the time, and moving that thing just absolutely constantly. They can control how sensitive it is, how fast it reacts to their speed of hand movement, and those are all the settings that they've got there on the top of it. And this picture in the middle is that flight control station. So you can see he's got lots of different options that control the way that the functions work as we sail around the course. There's another video, just a manoeuvre that we did. This is in the build-up to training in Plymouth.
Do you feel the G-force?
Yeah. I mean, so coming into this manoeuvre, you know, we're doing 35 knots as we're going into this, we're doing 40 miles an hour, and you're sitting on the outside. Imagine sitting on the outside of your car, right outside the window, turning as fast as you can, 270 degrees, and then, hence why So, you know, as we're doing that manoeuvre, you asked about G-forces, and literally my face was like filling out the side. The turning speed is so fast, and when people get on the boat, you know, they're not holding on, they're just literally flying across the thing. So it is, like, imagine driving your car around, sitting out the window, and turning the wheel just as fast as you can, and sitting on the outside of the turn, or the inside of the turn. So it's very different according to where you're sitting on the boat. So I'll touch on a bit about the setup. So as you can see, you saw in that manoeuvre, we've switched sides. So we're all spread across the boat. Now every person on the boat has a role, and the time constraints of all that stuff happening when you do a tack or a drive is absolutely, you know, like hundreds of seconds precise on when people actually press those button functions. You know, it sounds very easy to just go and hit the button at the right time, but it is all exactly the same as our normal sailing theory. When we turn the boat, we've got to drop a dagger board. We've got to get that dagger board at the right angle of attack to attach flow. We then have to catch the rate on that dagger board. The boat is being flown on the other dagger board all the time. That dagger board then has to be lifted up, the wing has to be popped, the jib has to be eased and then re-trimmed on. Everybody has to cross the boat, there's different people flying and different people distributing the roles all the time while we go around. So there's so many ducks have to be in line to make all of that stuff happen. But the feeling when you do a good manoeuvre is fantastic, but obviously no manoeuvre is ever the same, and there's always tiny little changes that everybody's having to react to. Within the MD4, like I said, we can change the speed of things the way that they happen. So, for example, we can change the speed that the wing will invert, so it goes from one side to the other. One of the biggest developments we made in the cups in the last sort of 5 years was discovering how important it was to pop the wing through, or pop the sails through. And so in the MD4 we can change that by how many degrees per second it moves. For example, it's literally just go into the wing data page and just slide a bar graph straight along. Different teams have different styles. Some like to turn the boats really fast, some turn it much slower. Some use the old dagger board to pull down more as they come out of the turn, and some lift it earlier, and consequently they change the speed that the dagger board will move up, or change the speed that the dagger board goes down, or the angle that it hits the water. And we can do all that within the MD4, within some of those panels that I showed you of the flight control station, and we also change it for the conditions. So we have a different page on our MD4, J1, J2, J3, different wing, and small wing. So we have 5 different settings that are just literally shortcuts, presets for your different setup and configuration of foils, wings, and jib size. One of the other massive things that we have is obviously, you heard on that video, the whine from the foils is like piercing. So we're wearing noise cancelling headphones all the time and communicating through military communication devices that are voice activated. And they mean we can talk, literally as quiet as this, and you can hear over the foils exactly what's happening all the time. And but what that does mean is because the quotes are moving so fast, the communication has to be super concise, super clear, very, very simple, and very methodical to make sure those time sequences work. And then we're also racing in like wacky venues, so you have to anticipate the changes and manage the mistakes. And then the other thing that's really huge is think outside the box. If you were to tell me 5 years ago that we'd be sailing these kind of boats with 3 people, there's no way I would have believed you. But now we're doing all the manoeuvres we've ever done in them with just 3 people at times. So that gives you a bit of a summary of Sail GP. That's the environment I'm working in now, but it's not a development environment. The boats are very much how they are, and it's about us learning to sail them as well as possible. We are developing sailing styles, and that's making us sail them faster, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how we've got to those boats, and also, some of the developments that have gone past that. I was, touched on at the start, I was really lucky to be part of Luna Rossa when foiling first sort of came on the scene, and we were sailing we had the AC72 design rule. None of us had a Scooby what we were taking on with those boats. It was like driving a Formula 1 car on wet tyres the whole time, in the 80s with just the most ridiculous control systems. We started off, this picture at the bottom here, that was like a top secret camp in Cagliari. We had this place in the corner of Sardinia that we were learning to foil. And we basically felt that every time you sat on that thing, you felt like a bobsleigh team or something out of Cool Runnings. And just get on there, we had no flight control system. So we knew that if you went over a certain speed, you were going to crash. And so you just accelerating, get to 33, get to 34 knots, like, oh shit, you just crash. And that was basically all of our days. And we just go out, try different settings, try canting the board out, try a slightly different shape. But the boards take a long time to make. A dagger board for an AC72 takes 3 months to make. There's that many layers of laminate involved in them that you cannot, by the time you get a board, often you've already designed it and you've already realised it's a lemon. So many of the teams have wasted so much money on building boards that they never ever use. So it was evolving so fast, and Team New Zealand basically, we had a partnership with them, with Luna Rossa, and they shared some of this foiling experience, and that helped us to get foiling. It meant that we then started designing foils that we shared with Team New Zealand, and we had kind of a shared build-up to that America's Cup in San Francisco. And then we launched the AC72s, we built these foils for them. And we had no idea when we were setting off whether or not these boats are going to hydrofoil. I mean, they were just enormous things. The rules have been designed to try and stop us hydrofoiling. And Team New Zealand had got around the rules, and we're setting off the first couple of days sailing these boats. You start taking off, like, no idea what's going to happen. But very, very quickly, we started to realise a lot of the limitations. The biggest ones was cavitation. The SL33 just down in the bottom right, there's a 33-foot boat, and up until 1 month before the America's Cup was actually starting, the SL33 was the fastest Luna Rossa boat because the AC72 would not go over 36 knots. We're basically completely limited by cavitation, the water just vaporising around the radius of the dagger board. So the load you get in the boat, you'd start sailing, you'd start accelerating, and that cavitation onset would just be so violent that the whole boat starts shaking, all of the daggerboard system around it starts shaking. And that has been one of the biggest areas of development over the last 10 years. And part of that is the structures. You know, you're lifting, with the AC-72, you're lifting a 6-ton boat on a piece of carbon, you know, the width of this table. So it's an enormous amount of load going through that. And with any boat, we all know that if you've got a big fat foil, it's not going to go fast. And so that's been a real constraint to the speed that these boats go over the last years. And developments in how we make those things has been an enormous change. You know, the Kiwis, you see, you look at the foil that they developed there for this last America's Cup. It's such a refined, super thin section, and the way that they've got to build these structures has taken an enormous amount of engineering to get to where they are now. With the AC in Bermuda, it was one of the biggest things that helped the Kiwis out. They had the side floors, I'll come on to that in a minute, but one of the biggest things that they had was they had much, much thinner daggerboards than everybody else, and that's because they literally, their engineering was just way, way ahead of everyone else. They built the radius of the daggerboards out of steel, so they spliced the carbon into steel, and that meant that they could sail with a much thinner section, so their cavitation speed was much higher, and that then meant that they could sail with bigger foils that had a larger wind range and were more optimised for the venue in Bermuda. So little things like that are slowly trickling down through the sport, and we're seeing it in more and more boats that we sail or foils that we use every day. So the sections have become, you know, they started off with very, very simple sections, and as time's gone by, that cavitation and trying to limit it or encourage it has become the norm. So people like Poole with his sail rocket, that boat was designed to cavitate on purpose and break through that cavitation bubble. And you know, we had huge cavitation buckets, which is just, it describes the serious onset of drag. And with the changing section shapes that they've done and the structural changes, they've managed to massively increase those speeds. You know, the cavitation onset, like I said, was 36.5 knots in our AC-72, and now we're doing 53, you know, in a boat that's a lot lighter. The other things that, as in that AC-72 cycle, was we had the first foiling boat manoeuvres, and we started driving on them. You know, the mothers paved the way, and none of us really believed that we'd ever be tacking. But now we're sailing around the course 100% dry, and everybody was by the Bermuda America's Cup. And then obviously we saw that go to another level with this most recent America's Cup that's happened. But the other thing that is huge, and has been a major part of it, and you can see it on the Oracle boat there, and it was a huge part of why they won the America's Cup in San Fran, was aerodynamic drag. You know, we're going upwind at speeds 35, 40 knots. In 25 knots of breeze, you've got 65 knots of apparent wind. You know, you hold your hand out your car window when you're driving along at 65 miles an hour, and there's a lot of friction. But and that was one of the huge benefits of the cycles that they had at Team New Zealand as well. And as we saw with the Prada boat and the Team New Zealand boat, it was, from the last America's Cup, it was a huge part of their program and their development systems. But what that means, you know, in everyday sailing is very, very applicable, and we'll touch on that in a second. The system's catching up. The other thing that the cyclers had was they could produce oil. You know, we're very lucky with the F50 that we sail now, where we have an engine that produces all the energy. But in the America's Cup boats, you have to produce all the energy through hydraulic pumps yourself. So the cyclers are producing like 30% more oil. In that America's Cup, we could only tack every 50 seconds. We literally didn't have enough hydraulic oil to do more tacks than that. So the Kiwis could tack about every 25 seconds, which obviously is an enormous tactical advantage. And part of that came through cycling, and also just being really, really efficient with their systems. And you know, we do think you've got your standard harp and bait box. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice already. You've got a standard harp and bevel box where it connects to the winch to the drive shaft, and you know, we're optimising all those systems and taking those and taking what is it, an 85% efficient system through to a 91% efficient system, and then putting those all the way through the boat, and suddenly it makes an enormous difference, and you can produce, you know, a lot more oil, and suddenly you can tack every 45 seconds, not every 48, 50 seconds. So that's how much the system optimization has affected it. And also the foils have become a lot more acute, and the angles have become a lot more aggressive, and that's meant that the rate control systems that I showed you pictures of have got much, much better. And actually what the Kiwis had in Bermuda at that first America's Cup that they won more recently was they had an automated flight control system. So they developed something with an airline and basically with a fighter pilot software engineer, something that would effectively feel the sense in the flight of the boat and then get around the rule by putting it in interaction so that someone would basically move something around, and that would be the human interface. The rule was written in that there had to be a human interaction, and they very cleverly got around it and meant that they could fly the boat much more accurately. So all the other helmsmen were there flying the boats on their grip shifts on their wheels, and that's why Pete Burling looked like he was out to lunch, because he wasn't flying the boat and it was being flown for him. And that was another benefit of the site clause, in that they got their hands free. So that kind of stuff is what has enabled the boats to get to where it is. It's not just the design of the foils, it's been the systems around them, it's been the aerodynamics, it's been the structures and the sections that have evolved over time. You know, just to give you a brief summary of some of that, in that America's Cup in 2013, by the end of the Louis Vuitton series, we were doing 121% VMG percentage upwind of what we started the Cup. So we started at 100%, we improved 21% on our performance upwind. And Team New Zealand and Oracle were doing 140% of our upwind performance percentage by the end. At that America's Cup that they won in San Francisco, Oracle, they were doing, when they started foiling upwind, they were doing 30 knots upwind at 48 degrees true wind angle, in about 22 knots of true wind speed. And in this America's Cup that's just happened, that Team New Zealand just won, you know, we saw Team New Zealand going upwind at 42 knots at 36 degrees. You know, they're going 12 degrees higher and 12 knots faster in 10 years of development. And then, like I said, with the F50s that we've learned a lot more about, we've gone from a cavitation onset in Bermuda of like 41 knots through to cavitation onset of nearly 50 knots. Sorry?
If you've got a cap to go that close to it.
Yeah, we're doing our performance numbers now. We're doing about, I think in 22 knots of breeze, we'll be doing about 33 knots of boat speed at about 38, 39 true wind angle. So, and that's gone from probably 29, 30 at about 40 true wind angle. So we're much narrower for a little bit more speed on the F50s with the foils that have evolved. So the Moth is like the everyday boat that a lot of us see that really reflects a lot of this development. You know, some incredible outside-the-box thinkers like Andrew McDougall and Kevin Elway that designed the Exocet, Cookie who's designed this most recent boat down below, and then Paul Beaker who's been hugely involved with the America's Cup. The sort of things that they've got is really adaptive sail plans. You can see the sails, that picture in the middle is Chris Lashley on the right, and that's the previous generation of that same sail on the left with Jason Belbin. And that was another major part of the Kiwi success in this last America's Cup. You know, they were able to sail with much smaller foils that were a lot less drag because their sail plan was so adaptive. They were really able to generate big decks when they required out their rig, but they could also flatten it an enormous amount. I think that's one of the things, you know, that I've seen happen a lot with sailing over the last sort of 10, 15 years is generally moving towards softer masts, more rough curve in the design of the sails, and flatter moulds, which means that you can generate more tolerance in the sail, get it deeper when you want more power, and flatter when you want less. And because the boats are going faster and faster, we want flatter sails all the time. The other thing you see on them is aero drag gains. You know, we talked about the aerodynamic drag gains on the America's Cup boats, and The boat at the top is a Ninja, that's a moth from sort of 10, 12 years ago. And then you look at the boat at the bottom, which is the most recent rocket. It's got solid wings, it's completely smooth and flush to the wind. The sailor's wearing lycra suit. The aero drag is massively reduced, you know. And in fact, the biggest aero drag on a moth is the human sailing it. But the reduction in drag through the change in the wing and the plan shape, the lowering of the sail and everything is enormous. It's also the righting moment, you know, the width of the boat. The boat at the bottom, if the wings are angled higher, so when it's leaning over like the boat in the middle, the boat is effectively wider, so it has more righting moment. The other thing that they've done is they've reduced the rig height, so bringing the centre of effort lower, so they have more righting moment. All of these things are very similar to what happened in the America's Cup over the last years and what's been the difference between success or not. The other thing is the section shape and the preparation. So I haven't really touched much on this preparation of the foils, but boats like a GC32 or something like that, which is some of the hydrofoiling boats we race, if your surface preparation is wrong, you literally cannot get downwind. If you polish the foils too much, then you won't get any grip or reattachment, and the boat just crashes off the foil. It's really similar with a moth. You know, the lake sailors in the UK that are sailing up at Rutland or Grafham, they literally carry a bit of 400 grit sandpaper in their buoyancy aids, because when the water gets colder, they have to change the surface finish to get the water to attach to the foil to be able to sail downwind or race around. And similarly, it's the same with the America's Cup and the F50, you know, so we start to see the massive importance, and the faster the boats go, the more you see that. And you know, I was talking to someone about the problem that we've been having with the F50s recently, where the foils are getting detailed a lot, and because they're constantly getting service, they keep tripping flow. And you know, we had a massive problem at the event this weekend where our rudders just kept letting go all the time, and so we've really started to see the importance of that surface preparation. And then the structures, the new beaker moth from Poole Beaker that I suspect will win the World Championships. Hopefully Dylan Fletcher will win in his rocket, but the Beaker is the new boat to beat, and they've got exactly the same technology as I mentioned. They're splicing steel into carbon shafts, and that means they can make the foils much, much thinner, but still maintain the strength that they need to. So how's this, you know, how's it affecting all of us as everyday users? I see now, you know, I go down to Weymouth and Portland, for example, where I do a lot of sailing and a lot of sort of training down there. And there's just foiling boats out in the water all the time. You know, I go to Poole Harbour and go wing foiling, and there's foils everywhere. A lot of the sailing clubs around the country, there's lots of wasps, there's 101s, you know, there's bigger boats like the 69F in Garda, there's the NACRA 15s for the youths and the 17s in the Olympics, mosquitoes for people learning to foil, and then, like I say, wing foiling is just absolutely going bananas in the UK and worldwide. Kite foiling and windsurf foiling, you know, 5 of the next 11 Olympic sailing medals are on hydrofoils. So it is coming. It's possibly not coming to everybody, but it is definitely affecting our sport enormously. And a lot of that understanding, and the reason why that's able to happen, is because of what's happened with the foils and the evolution over the last 10 years with the Cup. You know, I had a really nice chat sort of 4 years ago with Andy, the guy that runs Easy Riders, and he was like super grateful to the America's Cup and all of the development that happened. You know, what we've learned about ratios of foils, how long they should be, how wide they should be, how high aspect, the separation between the front foil and the back foil for stability. That has meant that, you know, things like these wing foils, you can jump on one of those and literally if you can stand on a board, you can be hydrofoiling just like that. And in a very, very stable manner. And that's made it an enormous difference to the options available and that development. The structures have also enabled that to happen, you know, like I said, sort of the evolutions and the introduction of the high modulus carbons that are used and making that much more accessible. And I think it's really difficult to know where it is going to take us. I think we're seeing wasps become a boat that a lot of the youths want to move into now. the youth windsurfing, they're getting into the, there was a lad here that was at Parkstone Youth Week the other week, and he's talking about he's going straight into the IQ foiled, I think it's happening more and more, and we've got Ellie Aldridge who's racing in the kite foiling, and I think we're going to see a lot of the youth sailors are going to be going that way as time goes by, especially over the next 10 years when those boats become even more and more popular. So I guess I just want to sort of come up with a few things I think are really relevant to everybody's everyday sailing. I touched on the adaptive sail shapes. I think a lot of the sail boats where the sail design is not one design and you have some options. Your Merlin rockets, things like that. The fleet has generally gone toward, they've gone carbon mast, the mast has got bendier, you use luff curve more for the shape of the sail, and the mould shapes get flatter. That can is applying across all fleets. And with the faster boats, you can see the depth in the X-boat sail versus the depth in the sail on the RS800. Obviously, the RS800 is a one design class, but it shows you the difference in the speed that the boat's moving, but still you want the option of being able to flatten the sail. You'll know when the breeze picks up. So I think the way that rigs have gone and the way that rigs are developing, it's well worth bearing with that in mind. The aero gains, there's a guy called Alan A who works for the British Olympic sailing team, and he is just absolutely anal about this stuff. And he's like, you've got to take your kite halyard down to 2 mil. You can't sail around with a 4 mil kite halyard. Like, why is that? And he'll start to quantify it into meters around the course, and it's unbelievable how much those differences make. Like your shroud pins and things like that, your little clever spins in the end of your spreader, the little boxes where your shrouds fit, where your forestay goes through, and all that kind of stuff. If you can pair them in, if you can take them, or if you can cover them up, if you can reduce the brake diameter, if you can, this guy on the bottom, he's taken aero drag to the extreme, with no rash vest, but I think, even when you're sailing any boat that's moving upwind, if there's 20 knots of wind, and you're sailing upwind at 7 knots, you've got 27 miles an hour of aero drag, and that's going across your whole rig. Maybe not so much of it's going across your body, but there is some of it going across your body. I'm not expecting everyone to wear speed suits, but I think it's worth bearing in mind. Even on your X-boat, your 515, maybe you can take your kite halyard, maybe you could reduce the diameter of your main halyard. All those kind of things make a very, very big difference throughout your platform and the area. The surface preparation and detailing, the hydrofoils we clean them with acetone every time before we're about to go on the water on all of the boats we sail. So there's absolutely no fingerprints, no grease, no nothing on them. So that's just and then before that they need to be prepared absolutely meticulously, and the shape of them maintained as per the design. But I can't emphasise enough, how much you go around the boat park, you see scratches in everybody's downboards or a little chip in the rudder. Oh, it's fine. But all that stuff makes an enormous difference to the performance of your boat. How quickly it gets flown, how quickly it accelerates, how high its top speed is, whether your rudder works. You're going downwind when you're sailing your trapeze boat with the spinnaker and you're going quick and suddenly the rudder's stalled. It's almost definitely going to be because there's a little chip out the leading edge of your rudder. So all that stuff, it's very easy to neglect, but it does make an enormous difference. Rising moment is king. Like, we all know that we want to sail the tallest person. But if there's anything that you can do to your boat to optimise that, some boats you're allowed to, the fin, for example, they square off the angle on the point that they're hiking to get the absolute maximum rising moment out of the boat. And things like that, there's definitely options there when you're choosing a teammate. Just think about how you can get more rising moment. How do we optimise our hiking technique? How do we optimise our trapezing technique? Could we hold our 15-pound arm up higher and things like that? It all makes an enormous difference, as we've seen in all the cut boats and everything. The other thing that we learn with the fast boats is that you get absolutely brutalised for bad boat handling, and but it's the same in any boat, and it's so easy to neglect. To be able to make any tactical decision, the better your boat handling is, the easier it is to race, the faster you can sail, and the more enjoyment and the better you do. The other one is your communication. You know, we're communicating at very high speeds. It has to happen very quickly. It has to be meticulous and it has to be precise. And you think about a number of times when you're racing, when you started when you didn't want to accelerate, or you didn't tack when you wanted to, or you didn't put the pole on, and so on. So I think I can't emphasise enough how much value there is in just spending a little bit of time thinking about the words that you use when you're racing around the course and how you discuss things with each other. That pretty much covers it. Does anybody have any questions? I hope I haven't talked for too long.
Yeah. There's a picture of an AC-72 with a wing main and it's cranked out in. Wait, can you go back to that?
Yeah.
I think it was either one of it was cranked way, that's it. It's cranked way in past the sunflower.
Yes. Yeah, so what we have with the base is we get a lot of leeway with the base. And actually we purposely set up the leeway on the base and the rotation of the platform so that the wake of the dagger boards misses the rudders. So we end up bringing the clue of the wing quite often up above the centre line. And the apparent wind angles on the base, upwind on an F50, I don't know, I can't remember what it was in an AC-72, but upwind on an F50, but the apparent wind angle is about 12 degrees, and downwind is about 19. So it hardly changes whether you're going up or downwind, so the wing is basically always on the middle. And what we're doing is, with the wing, with the position of the glue, we've got a camber setting. We can control the depth of the wing, and we actually set the leading edge of the wing is what we're trimming, and then the back of it we're trimming the twist while we're constantly moving along. So on the F50, for example, I have a proportional joystick that controls the twist, which is like the combination of Cunningham main sheet, spread deflection, out all at once. And in that video, you saw the wing panting, like literally I can move the wing to completely depowered to fully powered up in pretty much that speed. So the wing gets set, the clue gets set to a position that determines the leading edge position because of the camber setting the wing, and then the twist is what controls the power in the boat immediately. But at the same time, the wing sheet is also like your course control.
Yeah, I was going to ask, obviously, foiling is starting to trickle down, and where do you see it going in like a mainstream club like Parkstone Yacht Club? Obviously, we've got the traditional boats like the X boats, magazines, and everything else. Do you see foiling boats racing on a club racing night? Do you see that in the future? We've got foiling boats racing on the same start line as our traditional slow. Yeah, I'm just like wondering where you see it.
Well, I honestly do, yes. I think it's going to take a little while, but I don't think it's going to be as long as some people think. And I think a lot of it is club dependent for sure. Launching the boats can be quite tricky. The Wasp is a good example of a very easy one to launch because you can put the dagger board down in the water. A lot of them you have to carry into the water on their side. You know, it's a very tricky place to launch them off from. There are a number of members that do. But there's boats like the 101, which are very accessible, very easy to launch. It's a trying around, so the boat doesn't capsize when you're launching it. I think that boats and designs like that are going to creep in more and more and more. It's a case of, I'm going on a sailing holiday the next few days with my family, and there's a couple of foiling boats there that I hope to try with my family, and I'm sure when more and more people doing that come back and like, oh, that was really good fun. It was a lot more fun than pushing the water, but it's not for everybody. So I think it will trickle into the clubs a lot quicker than we think. It already is for sure. And it's going to be interesting to see how it happens in the clubs where you've got a lot more of the Parkstone is very established traditional classes. Somewhere like Weymouth, it's very quick and easy to get into the water, but they don't have those established club racing, so it's quite a different environment.
Yeah, it's quite a hard one for the club to manage.
Yes, but I think, I think they will, and you couldn't get a better place to sail the boats when you're out on the water. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that comes about over the next years.
Is the depth an issue? Where you've got foils and you've got obviously.
As long as you stay foiling, it's not. It is, and you do. The general depth of the boats is quite a lot less than a lot of the boats that we race.
Yeah.
Obviously, a laser doesn't displace very much water whatsoever. A flying 15 a good bit more, but a moth is probably a metre, 1.2 metres, so they can sail in most of the places throughout the harbour. Yeah.
But is there some sort of sensor that you're going to go right off because the sandbanks just come up and you've got some days and boats around.
Yeah.
You're travelling at 20 knots, that's going to be embarrassing.
Yeah. Hitting the bottom and foiling boats is brutal. You don't want to do it. And the damage is huge, but I think generally it's, you're sailing around in conditions that I think in the harbour it would be absolutely fine, as long as you've got a good, the problem is that places come up on you quickly, and when you've got the handling to get in and out of them. That's why I think things like the 101 and the Wasp, they're very good examples where you can literally lift up a daggerboard and sail to the shore, and just the same as we do with everyday dinghies.
So we're going through a period at the moment with weed. So I've seen the moths at the open meeting a long time ago, and they just kind of crashed, don't they? So
yes.
So how when you're on your F50, when you're in Plymouth Sound, what happens then when you get weed?
Yeah, weed is a major, and I mean with the wing foiling, for example, in Poole Harbour, exactly the same. In certain tide states, we're picking it up from the bottom all the time. It's blooming annoying, and it means that you literally are falling off the foil, and it highlights to you how important the section shapes are and things like that. It is really hard to get it off, and you basically got to stop and reverse. It's not the same as lifting a dagboard.
What happens in these venues you're doing, like Denmark?
Yeah. Well, actually, we haven't had any major scenarios where we've had a lot of weed yet. There's been collisions with things in the water, and they can be quite disastrous. In Bermuda, we had a major problem with that. But weed has not proved to be a feature so far.
So if you hit one of those big jellyfish at 50 knots, what happens then?
Yeah, it's a good question. Jellyfish, you tend to go through them pretty quick. And it's quite amazing the size of the jellyfish, even in a moth, that you go through. As long as you sort of hold yourself into the boat well. There's other objects in the water that you do not go through quite as well.
What implications do they have for speed limits in harbours?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question. In Weymouth, for example, where we do a lot of the moth sailing, this is 6 knot restriction zone for an enormous amount of the area. It's almost impossible to sail a foiling boat under 6 knots if the wind is strong enough to foil. So it is a problem, and I don't know how that would be. I mean, we seem to be able to go everywhere on wing foils and kite foils in the harbour. So I would think that if you're sailing a foiling boat, you would be able to as well, but I'm not sure there.
I mean, there's safety considerations.
Yeah, it is, and the boats are silent. They come up on you. You've got no idea it's coming. The F50 is a little bit different because it's whining. You can hear it coming from quite a way away. But something like a moth, all you can hear is the flight control system, the one at the front going tick, 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 tick. So if you're upwind of it, you can't hear anything coming to you, and they do sneak up on you, and it is a problem. And on the F50s now, after we had a crash with the American team on the first event in Bermuda this year, and we now have collision software on the boat, on the race display that we have on the wing that tells us when we're on a collision course, and it flashes up an alert and then shows us where the boat is and how we are relative to it. So it is something that is a feature for sure. On a similar vein, though, I suspect that people said the same sort of things about boats like Dart 18s and Hurricanes and things like that in the 90s.
All about working in apartments a bit.
Working from, yeah. Well, the Mothman's go outside.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Good stuff, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.